Hello, this is Brady. In this video, I want to show a little bit about how I use Zotero, which is a free software, along with Microsoft Excel to check for the completeness of bibliographic data and to do some basic bibliometric analyses. Now, there are a lot of very good software out there for different analyses of bibliographic data. However, all it takes is one problem with the data you have or the design of that software in order for your entire analysis to be invalid, to have issues arise. And it might not even be obvious to you that there are issues with the data unless you thoroughly look at that data beforehand. So this is a preliminary step that I think you should take when beginning to do an analysis of bibliographic data to ensure that all the data is complete and to generate some basic analyses of things like authorship, journals, keywords, those kinds of things. So I'm going to share my screen and show you how that process occurs. I'm gonna get to full screen here. So as I said, Zotero is a free software. It's at zotero.org, Zotero.org. It's a free download. It's very easy to install, of course, and all of that. When you install it, it's got a very basic platform. It's similar to EndNote if you've used EndNote before. Now, EndNote is proprietary. It generally would cost to have it unless you live in one of those countries where you can get access to it for free. But in large part, it's something you have to pay in order to use. So Zotero is a free alternative. It doesn't have as great a functionality in some areas, but it works for this purpose that I use it for. So this is what the Zotero interface looks like. And in order to use Zotero with your bibliographic data, you're going to want to download the RIS file. So files with the .ris extension file format, which is generally what you'd use for other bibliometric software as well. Your library will be blank. You'll be you'd create a new library. When you first started, you wouldn't have all these files like I have now. You can then import your RIS folder or file by hitting File up here and then Import. It's going to ask you what file type. There's only one option, so I don't know why they asked that there. And then you need to locate your RIS file. So I have one here that is called Part 1, and I can open that. And then you can click this. This means that it'll create a new folder here that contains just your files that you're going to be using for this project. If you don't click that, then it's just going to upload it to this main library here. And that's not a very good idea when you have a lot of files. For instance, I end up having like 60,000 resources across all these different libraries files I've imported. And that makes it very difficult to find just the ones that I want to use for this specific project. So you want to import it into its own collection so that it comes in a folder with just the resources for this specific project. Now, I already did that, and my Part 1 folder is right here. So here's all my files. There's 50 articles. I downloaded these from a couple of different databases. And so one thing you can see right away is there's some duplicates from the different databases. For instance, these articles right here are duplicates. And part of the problem as well can be sometimes articles get uploaded to databases multiple times because of slight variations in the title, but you can tell that these articles are identical. They have the same author, the same main title. So the process of using Excel here is going to allow us to identify those articles and remove the duplicates before we do any further analysis. So that's something I'm talking about when I say, making sure that your data has good quality is checking for those duplicates. Now, once we have these files here, we actually can delete, just hitting delete. You can hit OK if you can see obvious duplicates, but there'll be other ways to do that within Excel. To get it to Excel, we want to go to Export Library. So let's make sure we have part 1 selected here, that folder we want to export. We want to hit Export Library. And then for format, if you want to get it into Excel, select the CSV, comma separated values format. The rest can stay the same here, and you hit OK. It's going to give you the option to save it. So you can save it as AI libraries, data 1 or whatever. And then you can save it in that CSV format. Now, I just saved that in my downloads folder. So that's going to be here, downloads. And I can open that up. That's going to bring us to our CSV file here. And you can see all the bibliographic data that's been exported from that original databases is available here. The first thing you want to do once you have it in this format is actually change the save format from CSV to Excel workbook. And then you can actually save that to your documents or to a specific folder if you'd like. Get X out of this one. And then let me do this. So I'm going to save this as this file here. I'm going to overwrite. Excel workbook, AI library, save. I'll overwrite that. The reason you want to save it as an Excel workbook is because if you have it in CSV format and then you create extra sheets here, which I'm going to do, it will only save that first sheet in CSV format. That's typically a format that's used when you're importing, data from a spreadsheet into a different system to use. So it only uses that first sheet when it's importing it. You want to use an Excel workbook if you want to have multiple sheets because you're going to be doing some analysis within Excel. So one thing you can do is clean some of this up by deleting irrelevant information. These are all journal articles. The key is not necessary to us, so we can delete these and clean things up quite a lot just by removing things that aren't going to be necessary at all to our analysis we're going to do here. There are a lot of blank ones where they just haven't filled in the metadata for it, so it's not really going to help us at all for the analysis, and we can just make it really clean looking by deleting some of those and getting down to what we need, which are things like abstract, the keywords, journal, the article title, authors, publications, those kinds of things. Now, if we click here, we can see there's 51 entries because there's 50 articles. Now, if we want to ensure that we have complete data, that means that in each column, there should be 51 data entries. If there's not, then that means we have missing data. So we can click on each column simply and see, okay, there's complete author data for all articles, complete title data, complete publication data. We have complete abstracts and complete tags. However, if we click on issue, for instance, we can see there are a few entries where that data is omitted, perhaps because they don't have issues. But you can see it tells us here we have 48. So that means there's 3 articles that didn't have an issue. That's not a problem with issue because those journals just may not have issues. Some journals don't have issues, they just have volumes. But if you have articles where there's no authors, then that can definitely negatively impact doing any kind of authorship analysis. Now, again, as I said, you can do some identification of duplicate articles here, and you can do that by going to the data tab up here and clicking remove duplicates, and it would then remove any duplicate articles. So there was one duplicate article that I identified, for instance. That's only with verbatim though, verbatim article titles, it would remove duplicates. If you want to look specifically for similar titles where, you know, it just had that slight variation in the title, you can expand this a little bit so you can see the titles that potentially have overlap. You can add the filter here also within the data tab, and you can sort A to Z, for instance, and that'll allow you to identify titles that are duplicates, like this one here has a duplicate that's very similar, as well as this one here. So you can use that process to identify some duplicates in names. Now, if you want to do some basic analyses, which I recommend doing some in here, and that gives you a lot of control over, you know, knowing how the analysis is being done, as opposed to just hoping that an automated process does it properly. So I would say with things like author frequency, title, publication, journal, abstract, and keywords, you can do the analysis somewhat manually. And so, for instance, let's work on publication here. And I would create a separate tab for that. I like to do my analysis in a separate tab and then just have this sheet where I have the full bibliographic data. So I'll call this publications, or you might actually call it journals, since we know these are all journals. You can copy that row, paste it in here. So now you have moved that data over here. And in order to get the frequencies very easily, typically what I do is I make a copy of that row. Then I'm going to go back to that data tab. I'm going to go to that remove duplicates again. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to remove duplicates. So these are all the unique journal titles we have. Removing ones that were repeated in this data set. And again, we highlighted this column and then went to the remove duplicates. Then to count the frequencies, we're just going to use the simple count if function. We're going to use for the range this A column. So we can do A2 through A1. It doesn't really matter what the max is. And you can use the function button and do comma that. And then you will be able to calculate that value. Then instead of having to type, so again, it's just count if, and then you enter that entire data in that column, and then you select the cell. So it's telling you how many times in all of the publications here in column A does library high tech news appear. So you have 4. Then in order to calculate that for all the journals, you can just drag that down and have that function work for all of them, and it'll count the totals for you. At that point, it's very easy to drag this row here, highlight that row and drag it, and then sort largest to smallest. And then it's going to tell you what journals appear most frequently. So it'll provide the frequencies for you. And for some reason, it's not working for my computer. but you should be able to hit F4. Oh, there it goes. So really what you need to do is hit F4 for all of these. That makes these absolute values. And the importance of that, having the absolute values here, is that it ensures that for all of these, it's selecting this entire range here. If you don't have the, if you don't use the F4 function here, and it's just A1 through 899, it'll automatically adjust this criteria here when you drag it down. So for instance, if it's A1 through A99 for this row here, when you drag it down, this is going to be A2 through A100, A3 through A101, and so on. So you want to use that F4, and you just select the A1 that you have here, and you just hit the F4 button, or the function in F4 button, depending on your computer, and do that for these two numbers in the range here. And then don't do it for the criteria, because you want that to change. So you notice when you don't push the F4 button here for B1, it'll change as you drag it down. So this is B2, this is B3, oops. This is B4, B5, and so on. So that's how you want it to work. You can do the same thing with authors. Of course, you have multiple authors, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. But you can convert these values so that each author appears in a different cell by going to text to columns. That's in the data tab, text to columns, go with delimited option. And then as your delimiter, use semicolon. You can see here it's showing you in the preview even that it's separated out the authors into different cells. Then hit finish. So now these authors are in a separate cell. And then you can do the same thing. It's going to be slightly different, but you can count if. Your range then is going to be a lot bigger, because it's going to be, you want to get all these rows and columns. So it's going to be bigger to do it that way. And then you can select the author name and use the F4 function. So this is going to only tell you the first author, though, if you do it this way. You can also take this data, oops, I shouldn't have done that, this way. Select that data, paste it here, and then remove these extra columns. So you've taken those extra authors and you've pasted them in here. You can then go here, home, find. This is on the home tab, find. Go to special, blanks. That's going to find all the blanks in here. And then you can go to delete cells, shift cells up. So that's deleted all the space here. So now you have every single author on any of these articles in one column here. And then you can do exactly what we did with the journals. So you're going to do this. You're going to go to data. You're going to remove duplicates. You're going to continue with current selection, column B. So there's 4 duplicates. So most of these authors are unique. Do A2 through A whatever. That second value doesn't matter. Just make sure it's large enough to include all the cells that are full. So there's 62. So I could just make this A62, but it also doesn't matter if it's A1000, because those are just extra blank cells. They won't count. Then, like the other one, drag it down. And then you can do your sort. So That way you can just get a basic idea. You can also do it in here just to get a basic idea of what it says based on this analysis, and then do additional analysis elsewhere. You also may need to do some manual checking of certain data, and it may not matter too much in certain cases, but you can see here sometimes the metadata gets entered weird. Again, this is something that can mess up other software, but you can see it clearly here what an issue is. For instance, this has, for some reason, the author's year of birth, and you need to delete that in order to ensure for consistency in the data, because there might be other places where her name is included as an author, but it wouldn't have included that year of birth, because that's a very odd thing to include in the author's actual name. So you need to consider that as well when you're doing the analysis. So those are just some basic ways to get your data into Zotero, and then to export it into Excel to do some basic analyses, and really mainly to just check the data for completeness, because you don't want the data to be skewed by some kind of omission or a flaw, or something like different ways of spelling a author's name that might make it look like one author has contributed less to a research area than others. But that would be easy to see if you brought it into Excel like this, and then can look and see that, oh, this is actually the same author here. So that's essentially what I wanted to discuss in this video. And you can message me if you have any questions about that.